You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
A few people came together specifically from the supermarket sector who felt the need to coalesce under one umbrella. So the association was being formed to look towards putting retail on the map of the economy and making sure that government sits up and notices its role. So when we talk about formal, we are specifically speaking about the retail that exists in urban areas. Similar to Nigeria, we have great challenges in terms of, let me call it as it is, corruption. For me, retail is the springboard from which the economies will grow.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Wambui, who is Chief Executive Officer at Retail Trade Association of Kenya. Welcome to the podcast, Wambui. How are you?
I'm very fine, Tessa, enjoying the heat and sun of Nairobi. Vis-a-vis your very cold weather probably right now.
Yes. We've actually had some snow in the UK, so the weather isn't so great.
Okay.
I think, as we mentioned before, I've just come back from Nigeria where it was 36 degrees, so I'm experiencing a bit of
adjusting.
Adjusting, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Wambui.
Okay, so my name is Wambui Mbarire from Nairobi, Kenya. I have been in administrative positions for quite a while. In the last 8 years, I've been running the Retail Trade Association of Kenya. I'm a mother of 3. Very passionate about retail, especially in Africa, and doing retail as per what exists in Africa vis-a-vis trying to quickly adopt what exists in the developed world. So I look to have engagements where I can push the conversation of retail, because I do believe that is what will create a proper platform for our industrialization, for the manufacturing sector, and what we call is our key economy sector, that is agriculture.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. You've given us a great overview of who you are professionally and personally, and what your overall missional aims are through the Retail Trade Association of Kenya. As I mentioned in my intro, you are currently Chief Executive Officer at Retail Trade Association of Kenya. So can you tell us a bit more about the organization in terms of how it started, what you do, and what you aim to achieve through the organization?
The association is going to be 10 years this year. Was started in 2012, but really started operations in 2013, going to 2014 towards the end. The purpose of the association's formation was sometime in 2012, there was a need to have a voice for the sector. Being one of the largest sector in the economy, it did not have a representative body. And a few people came together specifically from the supermarket sector who felt the need to coalesce under one umbrella to be able to push their needs and requirements to engage with government and other stakeholders. But it took off in 2013, immediately after we had one of our terrorist attack at what was then Nakumatt Westgate Mall.
Yes.
And that really showed people, because of the challenges thereafter in terms of dealing with the landlord, dealing with the insurance company to cover the losses, dealing with employees who had been affected. So the need to really come together and speak as one and to support those retailers who are within that mall was very loud at that point in time. So the association was formed with the intent of advocating and lobbying originally towards getting better recognition of the sector. As happens in a lot of Africa, outside South Africa, actually, retail is not really given a lot of prominence in spite of how significant it is. So the association was being formed to look towards putting retail on the map of the economy and making sure that government sits up and notices its role. So once it was set up, we have worked with it towards identifying key areas in retail, and to be able to serve the members, we created subsectors within the association. The largest retailers in our country are the supermarkets. So we have a supermarket sector, and then we have what we call a specialty sector. That specialty sector covers everyone who's not a supermarket. So people who are in fashion, apparels, books, optics, electronics, etc., and beauty as well. People who are in that particular sector, who are usually smaller in size compared to the supermarket, then belong to the specialty sector. And then we have the eatery sector, because then we have cafes and restaurants. We have a lot of fast foods. We have coffee shops, and that makes another sector. And food-related issues are very different from the issues related to supermarkets or to the other retailers. So over and above the lobbying and advocacy, what we've also moved further in doing is looking to train, create a curriculum in the sector. As you might know, outside South Africa, again, Africa doesn't really have a retail curriculum. And that has been one of the greatest challenges of the sector, in that in most cases, a career is created out of going to school to study whatever it is. So be it marketing, be it sales, be it insurance, be it banking. You end up going to school, similar to engineering, for example. You end up going to school to study the skills that are related to that sector. That has not existed in retail. Net effect of that is that there's usually very little ownership of a retail job, both in the formal sector and in the informal sector, both from an employee point of view and from an employer point of view. And that creates challenges of proper growth within the sector. So one of the things we've also been doing is facilitating learnings from people who've learned on the job and can share that skill, working with government and government-related stakeholders to start creating a curriculum that people can study, and also bringing in skills from outside to try and help us as we work towards formal retail being really formal, because it is semi-formal in most places, even in our very big retail. So looking to see how can we help that become fully formalized.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned that the association is over 10 years and it started as a need to organise and support the retail sector in a range of ways across Kenya. So the Retail Trade Association of Kenya focuses on supporting what you'd probably describe as formal trade or retail. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So in terms of formal trade or retail, because we know a lot of trade and retail within Africa tends to take place informally. So when we look at the formal side of the retail sector in Kenya, what are the key things that we need to know about it?
Africa's retail is divided into, as you say, formal and informal. The association looks at the formal element more, even though we have an arm that is looking toward working with the informal to move them slowly into the formal and to educate them as to what formal actually means and what it would portend for them. South Africa has about 70% formal retail, and Kenya lies second at a mere 30%, which is really very small, because then even as we talk about formal trade, 30% in a country that is probably 90% retail oriented after agriculture is very low. So when we talk about formal, we are specifically speaking about the retail that exists in urban areas. And then the largest retail that is formalized lately is the supermarkets. So let me try and define a bit what our formal retail trade looks like. Our first local supermarket, was set up in 1975 or thereabouts. And it was formal in that it was in a formal structure, was a registered company, had a formal structure in terms of the management levels, was looking to use technology in their systems in terms of cash management, in terms of inventory management. However, the one skill that was even at that point still left out was the human skill. So we say our retail has grown significantly over the last 40 years, almost 50 years now, actually. But we see a really great disconnect in how formal it is when we compare it with other formal sectors, South Africa being one of them. So we will have an inventory system, for example, but that inventory system is then a bit disjointed. The receiving does not necessarily speak to the till.
Okay.
So you're doing all your receiving manually, for example, that is manually updated into your system. So the till can have a product that actually doesn't exist. So there's a disconnect in that, in us saying we are formal. But in the last 5-6 years, since the internationals started coming in, we've seen a lot of growth towards real formalization. And I'll tell you, one of the things that has happened is, as we adopted to having the internationals, the locals were copying a lot what the internationals are doing in terms of systems, in terms of layout, in terms of product management. So we saw a lot of South Africans being brought in to help local retail start formalizing that which was still informal. So we've seen a lot of very quick changes in the last 6 years that has really put the best of our local retail right up there, to the point where, with the exception of Carrefour of Majid Al Fatam, the other internationals have struggled to survive the onslaught from the local retail. So I would say we've come a long way in formalizing. Our systems are beginning to talk to each other from receiving to till, whether it's in the supermarket, whether it is in fashion, whether it's in the eateries. We have created a lot of efficiencies in our ordering systems, a lot of efficiency in how we are handling our staff, a lot of in-house training to instill that skill that we are saying doesn't really exist but is now growing.
Thank you for that, Wambui. So you mentioned that around 30% of trade in Kenya is formal, and also detailed how local retail has developed over the last 6 years. I know you focus on Kenya, but you do have knowledge in terms of retail Africa-wide. If we look at this development, is this different to other large African markets, such as, say, Nigeria, Egypt, or South Africa? Are they developing at a similar rate, or is it different rates in each market?
Okay, so the South African market is way ahead of any African retail market, way ahead. As I said, they're almost at 70% formal. That means a lot of their markets are formal in one way or another. And that portends also, there's a direct relationship usually with the per capita income of the population in that sector. Then I said Kenya is second to that. I had the good fortune to visit Nigeria sometime last year in November.
Yes.
Nigeria has a slightly above 3% formal. It's an extremely informal market, even in terms of the way they transaction. It is highly cash-led. Unlike maybe in Kenya, we have moved more towards either plastic money or mobile money. Cash is no longer king. I mean, it could be king, but I think because of the ease of using mobile money and using plastic money, be it a debit or a credit card, that has made significantly cashless in comparison to what I saw in Nigeria. Egypt's per capita income is also quickly rising. So they're quickly catching up in terms of their GDP is now almost, I think it's slightly higher than Kenya's, or at par, because then their retail is very quickly catching up. So outside those three, which kind of cover the, shall I say, the four corners, out of those four, being South Africa, Kenya, South Africa covering the south, Kenya covering the east, Nigeria covering the west, and Egypt covering the north, I would say that those are probably the most developed retail markets. The rest of Africa remains highly informal in terms of the retail that exists within them.
Thank you for that information. You detailed how informal or traditional retail still accounts for a large part of retail in most African markets, but we are seeing the growth of formal retail. So, from your perspective, how has the growth of modern or formal retail impacted traditional retail in Kenya specifically?
So when I say we're at 30%, we are actually have been at that 30% probably for the last 10, 12 years.
Okay.
It doesn't change much. And I would say this for the rest of Africa. A lot of consumers are still significantly pocket-led. And being pocket-led means you need to push your money as far as you can push it. So net effect is that you're going to be looking for places where the trader you're dealing with is able to either break bulk for you or can be in the position to give you credit facilities. So those two remain a challenge that will continuously lead to the informal sector being larger than the formal sector. As per capita income grows, as people's consumption power increases, then the formality of retail will grow. But as long as the majority of the population is still very pocket-led, they will be looking to shop where you can break bulk or get credit. And when I say break bulk, I mean a supermarket, for example, maybe will only sell to as low as 1 kilo of something. But in the informal sector, that can be broken down to grams. That then maybe, so for example, we have what we call a kadogo economy. That kadogo economy can break down to where you can buy 50 grams of sugar, but that won't happen in a supermarket setup. So as long as the greater demand is for stretching my $1 to perhaps create an entire meal, then the informal sector will remain larger than the formal sector.
Interesting. You mentioned that as per capita GDP grows, so will formal retail, which I think is a global trend because globally there is a strong correlation between per capita GDP and the market penetration of formal retail. But it could still be said that Africa's formal retail sector penetration is still generally low considering its economic development levels. Why is that? Is that a cultural thing or something different within African communities or society in general?
A country does, okay, I'll use Kenya as an example. Development-wise, infrastructure-wise, we're doing very well. But that does not translate to money in the pocket of the citizenry. So the lack of money in the pocket of the citizenry is the reason that the formal sector doesn't grow at par with the development in Kenya or in any other African country. So if the infrastructure, for example, makes it easier to move goods from one point to another or creates jobs that are putting money into people's pocket, then you see an upsurge in that formal retail. I'll give you a good example. Normally, the average Kenyan will shop in a supermarket about twice or thrice in a month, largely at end month for what we call, quote unquote, the middle income when they get their salaries. In the middle of the month, if people are getting paid mid-month, even that person who shops in the formal sector, during the month when they do not have sufficient cash flow, they retreat to buying whatever they require from the informal sector. Again, because it will break bulk, you're able to buy smaller quantities. And also because in the informal sector, in what we call as mom and pop shops, they're very relationship-led. So you're also able to get credit and pay at the end of the month when you have money. So as long as the money in people's pocket remains constrained, they will always revert back to the informal sector.
So do you anticipate that this will change anytime soon? And if it does, what will be the key drivers of the change?
I'll start with agriculture. I would say market linkages. If a farmer can get his produce direct to the market, eradicating brokers or middlemen, That means he gets more value for the full value for his produce. That means he has more money in his pocket, allowing him to upgrade himself to the next level. So if you're a low-income person, you're able to upgrade yourself to a higher level. Your demand and your preferences improve as you have more money. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Yes.
Your opportunities to buy better improve it's directly linked to how much money you have in your pocket. So if our market linkages for the agriculture sector improve, removing all the middlemen in between, and the farmer in the rural area is able to get full value for his produce, then he's able to buy better, uplifting the retail that is there to another level, because even what you're demanding now becomes, when you start buying brand, for example, because you have better consumption power. So as we develop our infrastructure as Africa, as we create greater efficiencies in the systems of manufacturing or in the processes of industrialization, and those efficiencies result in greater incomes for people, then definitely that moves people from the informality to the formal.
I agree. So you discussed the challenges faced and used the example of market linkages in agriculture. So if we look at the growth or maturity of supply chains in Africa, are African supply chains maturing at the same rate as the growth of the formal retail sector?
Yes and no. Yes, because then if I'm supplying a formal outlet, then you must be formal because you must have a system that speaks to my system. So in some cases, yes, because we have manufacturers who have been in business for a while. So they've also grown together with the supermarket or to the whichever kind of retail. In some cases, no, because some of those manufacturers or suppliers are still very informal. I'll give an example of a farmer who then starts doing some value addition and is looking to get into a formal outlet. He might not have the capacity to something as simple as shrink wrapping his produce. So it takes out some play catch up, some work together. And then again, there are people who are looking to compete with imports of similar products. A good example would be things like peanut butter or ketchup or tomato sauce. So as you try to catch up with the competition, then that forces you to move faster. But the capacity sometimes is limiting. We also have too many multinationals bringing in their produce. Then we also have the challenge of a very steep tax system locally, which then sometimes actually makes it cheaper to import than to buy produce that exists locally. And that creates a challenge for the local producer in trying to formalize because he can't compete with the price that the import is being put on the shelf at.
Thank you for sharing that, Wambui. You've detailed some of the challenges in terms of what local retailers face. But in order for this growth to take place, there needs to be an enabling environment for the sector to thrive, which is something I know that you are working on in terms of your lobbying work. So can you tell us about some of the work that you're doing with regards to lobbying and influencing government policy to improve the retail business environment?
Okay, so one of the things that has happened in our country in the last 10 years is we got a new constitution, and that new constitution created counties. Counties create two levels of government. You have national government and then you have the county government. In the teething years, which is still this, we're still learning how to work with the two governments. You realize that each county then comes up with its own finance bill. And that finance bill creates new taxes and new levies, not really taxes, let's say new levies and fees that any business then has to take part of. So in the last 10 years, we've worked with government specifically, both levels of government, to try and merge the two so that we are not suffering the taxes that are demanded from the national government and the levies that are being demanded. Because what has happened is that we have a lot of double taxation. If I give you a good example, we've had incidences where goods moving from one county to the next county are stopped at the border, and the county will then demand that, say, if you have a branded car, they'll say, well, you're coming into my county, you have to pay for advertising, because as you move around my county, you're advertising yourself on your branded truck. So working to remove those kinds of limitations of trade, that is one. Two, we have, again, as I said, because there's a limitation of how much money comes from national government to the county government, they then tend to be very focused on revenue collection other than service delivery. Similar to Nigeria, we have great challenges in terms of, let me call it as it is, corruption. In trying to do business, people always end up looking for the easiest way out of a problem. And then you have people paying off people here and there to facilitate business. So we've been trying to deal with, we call it Council of Governors.
Yes.
Is the body that is in charge of all the counties, and the governors then sit there and make plans and coordinate so that there's uniformity in how one county is dealing with a specific issue, to ensure that they encourage people to come and be able to set up and do business in their counties. We've seen a lot of change. We've just done the elections last year. And coming out of that, we have new governors who now, there's better understanding of what their role is. They are not in competition with the national government, because that seemed to look like a thing in the beginning of our devolution. And them looking to also work with national government and creating business hubs within the various counties that then will promote and grow their own counties. The other thing we've done a lot is, for example, our Kenya Revenue Authority. In a population of about 50 million Kenyans, we realize only about 5 million are captured. Let's say out of that 50, let's say 30 million of people who are in an income-generating activity. You realize only about 5 million of those really get caught into that tax bracket. Net effect is that the 5 million are then overtaxed. So working with the Kenya Revenue Authority to see how can we help you educate others, how can we work with you to simplify the tax system so that you're able to bring in more people into the basket, and then not only a few of us are suffering through various forms of compliance. When they want to implement, like now they are recently implementing a new tax collection system, working with them to pilot it to see that it works for business, educating them that tax should follow business, not business follow tax. So we shouldn't be looking to adjust how business is running. As a revenue body, they should be looking to understand how business is working so that they're able to then create a system that slides into our business systems vis-a-vis businesses having to readjust themselves to be able to cover tax. Because then that always has the disadvantage of we then have to amend a law to be able to change anything once a tax system has been put in place.
Interesting. So you detailed how you're working with government to educate on the Kenyan tax system. Outside of that, as part of your education activities, you also provide retail-related educational training. So I was wondering, what does this training involve, and why do you feel that it is important that people within Kenya or Africa receive retail-specific training?
There's something I say often. A lot of people in retail are in retail because they didn't get a job. I can bet you if you walked into any retail outlet in most parts of Africa, out of South Africa, and asked the person who's managing the shop floor what they're doing, the answer has traditionally been, I'm doing this as I wait to get a job. So as I said earlier, a job is associated, or a career is associated with some learnings. I went to school and studied the above. Now I am here, I want a marketing job, or I want to be a broadcaster. You went to school and gained that particular skill. That has not happened in retail. So to help that, we are working with a government body called the National Industrial Training Authority to create a curriculum for the shop floor. Now, that curriculum will allow somebody leaving school to go and study some form of retail, so that even if you open a shop, you take it seriously as a business or as a career. If you get a job in a retail outlet, you will own it because it's something you can build on. You can build from being a shop floor to being a merchandiser, to being a line manager, to being a branch manager, to being an MD in a retail outlet. So in looking to do that is in teaching people that retail is not sales, retail is not marketing, retail is not accounting. Retail is all those put together. You need to understand customer care. You need to understand your cash flows. You need to understand pricing. You need to understand shelf management. What lies where on a shelf? You need to manage your inventory. So creating that skill by educating people and teaching them those skills, both theoretically and practically, in my view, will greatly change what retail looks like in Kenya. And it will also help in formalizing retail in Africa. It's the same thing that we're working with Lagos Business School to try and do, educate those who are already in retail so that they look at retail as a profession, are able to push it to higher levels and create employment while doing it, and also create a career path for those people who are in retail so that they're not there waiting to get another career, but actually acknowledge that as a career.
Brilliant, brilliant. So you mentioned that most people in retail in Africa are there because they couldn't get a job. So retail is not seen as a viable career path in Africa. And this is something that you're helping change in terms of the perception. So as we go along formalizing and growing the formal retail sector within Africa, what role do you think formal retail can play in creating employment and growing African economies?
For me, we require a strong retail platform on which agriculture and manufacturing will grow. If we do not have a strong retail that will support raw produce, value-added produce from the agricultural sector, that will not support the manufacturing produce that is being manufactured within Africa, then those two sectors, in my view, still will not achieve their full potential.
Yes.
A strong retail creates demand for value-added produce from the market, from the agriculture sector. Strong retail creates a shelf for that manufactured produce or product. So if there's no retail shelf, there's no well-developed retail shelf to allow the manufacturer to be able to display his produce for people to see and interact and buy, then he is limited in how far he'll grow in his innovation and in his manufacturing. The same thing for the agriculture sector. We will continue exporting raw, which has the lowest value, and then it comes back as a manufactured, because somebody out there is demanding for processed tea. But we have not created a market for it because we don't have the know-how. But if we are able to we do have the know-how, but we are not creating visibility for that value-added product. So for me, retail is the springboard from which the economies will grow.
Strong retail would generate demand and shelf presence for local and manufactured products, and also how you are going about improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of the African retail market. So as the market develops, I know there are some people who have preconceived ideas of what the formal retail sector in Africa looks like. So what are some of the myths that you'd like to dispel about the formal retail sector in Africa?
One, that it doesn't exist, because it does exist. Two, that it is not developed, because I think we compete very well with the internationals that I've seen come into Africa. And even those coming from South Africa are not able to stay alive in the rest of Africa. I've seen ShopRite exit the Kenyan market. I've seen them exit or sell off in the Nigerian market. They left most of East Africa. I've seen Massmart attempt to also survive and not very successfully. The myth that we do not have a thriving formal retail is just that, a myth. We do have a very vibrant retail sector. Informal retail, if I use Kenya as an example, at 70% is what really holds up a lot of economies outside the urban areas. So I would want to dissuade anyone who's of there. And I would ask this, if it is not vibrant, why would various internationals be looking to come into Africa?
Yes.
Need and demand was not there. So the fact that we have a lot of internationals of different kinds of retail, be it supermarket, be it fashion, be it optics, be it apparels, looking to come into Africa, it means the demand is there, the capacity is there. We just need to get it a bit more organized so that it can fairly compete with anyone else.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So during our conversation, we've spoken at length about the growth and development of the formal retail sector in Africa. From the work that you're doing or from what you've seen, what role has technology played in the growth and the development of the sector in Kenya specifically?
I think it has played a great role in, one, creating greater efficiency. Retail is looked at as a source of employment. So anyone who's looking for a job and knows somebody ends up on the floor, and as I said, as they look to get another job. So because of that, and the fact that a lot of retail is family-owned and relationship-based, we found that before technology, there was a very heavy labor cost because there was no rationalizing of how many people you need, and you're not sure because you're not using any technology or any science in terms of employing people. But with the coming of technology, we see a bit more rationalizing of the number of employees in a given square footage. We see efficiencies around the supply chain. One of retail's greatest threat in any part of the world, and this now is not specific to Africa, is the shrinkage or theft levels that happen due to the amount of units and products that exist within any given retail. So technology, and specifically now in terms of inventory, allows any retail to know what have I received. I have received 10, and you're easily able to reconcile that I have sold 10. Without technology, you could receive 10, and it will take you quite a while to realize that you didn't really receive anything. They disappeared at the receiving end. But now technology allows you to capture and reduce the theft levels that exist within retail. Technology has also improved in terms of creating sustainability because it helps manage cash flows better. Linkages with your bank allow you to see what your cash flows look like, what your inflows and outflows are looking at. It makes you better placed to be compliant in matters. Tax, for example, allows you to better be able to place orders and capture what you need to stock up better. It allows you to create a pool of data that then can help you in terms of what am I stocking, what should I not stock because it's not moving in this particular branch. So technology has created a lot of efficiencies that has improved the look and feel of what retail looks like in the formal sector.
Thank you. So from what you've said, it's clear that the use of technology within formal retail is a positive trend. So outside of technology, what are some of the recent or current trends in the formal retail sector that you're excited about?
Adoption of e-commerce and digital presence of retailers, a really significant upsurge during the COVID period. It's very exciting that we are also learning because there's always been the feel from many people that e-commerce is in competition with brick and mortar, the realization that that is not necessarily the case and that the two complement each other. The adoption of e-commerce, especially in Kenya, is a very exciting space right now.
Brilliant. So the adoption of e-commerce, digitization of, I guess, shops or stores is a very exciting trend that you're looking forward to. As you said, it complements the brick and mortar, and I think that's the future of retail within Africa, the complementing of the online and offline. So if we look in terms of the future, where do you see Kenya's formal retail sector in 5 years' time?
I think we'll have increased the percentage of formal retail. I think technology, the adoption of mobile money, the changing face of the revenue authority and the governments will facilitate more people to formalize their business. Because I think with the knowledge that you can only grow if you're formal, you can only expand your horizon if you're formal, because most businesses, be it local or foreign, want to deal with a known entity. So to expand yourself, people are waking up to the fact that you do need to formalize how you operate. So I see a significant improvement from this 30% to at least even 35% within the next 5 years. Unfortunately, like most other countries in Africa, we are always quote unquote held hostage by political periods. So in the next 5 years, we'll be going into another election. So I don't know how that will look like and whether it will impact positively or negatively. How will this new government impact the business environment within those 5 years? Those are things that may affect the growth or failure to grow of the sector.
Thank you for sharing that. I think the retail sector within Kenya looks exciting, it looks promising, and I'm excited to see what you achieve in the next 5 years through the Retail Trade Association of Kenya. So, looking closer to home, where do you see yourself and the Retail Trade Association of Kenya in 5 years' time?
I see myself having moved to a different role outside the association, but still playing a significant role in improving the lot for the retailers. So perhaps working more with government or regulatory bodies to continue improving the business environment for all of business. I would want to do that. I would also want to have played a significant role to actually have put up a retail academy in Kenya, and not necessarily only online as done by Lagos Business School, but also a physical school, so that I will leave with the legacy that I actually did put in place a retail curriculum for the country, and hopefully that can pick up to other parts of Africa. South Africa does have various forms of retail curriculum. So I hope between what Lagos is doing, what we would probably do, and what South Africa is doing, we'll be able to further the lot for retail and wake the governments up to the fact that retail is probably one of the most important sectors after agriculture, which is Africa's largest economic activity.
Fantastic. You've achieved so much so far, and I believe you will achieve much, much more. So yes, I'm very optimistic and look forward to keeping in touch and seeing how things develop, how far you take the trade association, and any other activities that you engage in the near future.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are good or when times are challenging. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
I always tell people the only thing you cannot save is time. So you get to decide where your time goes. You can either spend it moving forward or spend it putting out fires. You get to decide.
I like that one, and it's one that I totally agree with. And I guess as someone working in retail, time is money. As we're coming towards the end of our conversation, do you have any closing remarks, final calls to action for anyone who's interested in retail in Africa, understanding the work that you do within the Retail Trade Association of Kenya? Any closing remarks, final calls to action?
Yes. Retail will create new frontiers for both the locals and the international. Retail in Africa creates new opportunities for innovation and new investments within Africa. My call to action is to governments in Africa be awake to the role of retail in our economy as the base for an explosion of the agricultural sector and the manufacturing sector.
Thank you for your time today, Wambui. That has been a great conversation, a conversation that I've looked forward to as we've had discussions before. I myself have worked in the retail industry as a buyer and within the supply chain in the UK. So it's also good to understand how the formal retail sector within Africa is developing and what are some of the opportunities and the challenges. So it's great to have you on the podcast and to get your first-hand knowledge and experience as someone who is fully embedded within that space.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Tessa, for having me. I look forward to having future engagements with you.
Definitely looking forward to future conversations, and we will speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.